There you go.
Go ahead. The floor is yours, man.
All right, I'm Matt Allard.
Could you include your age? That's important to.
I have to?
Well, you're at the most, you're in your early 30s.
Late 30s. To surprise you.
You could lie to me.
So I'm Matt Allard,
You're half my age.
37, from Middletown. Definitely honored to be here. I've been working on this series called Dynamic Waterscapes. I've unknowingly been working on this for probably 15 years. I've purposefully been working on it for probably 2. I've always kind of had, well, there's a lot of things going on here, but I've always kind of had, if you guys all know lens work, you know, the voice of Brooks in the back of my head saying you need to do project-based work, you need projects, you need a purpose, you need some kind of cohesive body of work, and I spent years thinking, like, I need a project, and I don't know what to do, and then probably 2 years ago, 3 years ago, you know, a lot of stuff happened in my life, and I started digging back through negatives and looking at stuff that I'd done over the years, and I went, pretty much every picture I've ever taken has moving water in it. I wonder, you know, what that means. So that kind of was the start of me putting this all together, but also when I go out, you know, looking for this type of work, I have a very narrow set of filters. You know, I know exactly what I'm looking for, and you know, I have a huge catalog of different spots that I check up on all the time, just kind of waiting for the right time to capture stuff like this. So you guys may have noticed there's writing that goes along with these. It's meant to be inspirational. Some of it, you know, describes stuff that was happening in my life, where I try to relate it to you know, what it means in terms of how does this relate to moving water, how does it relate to rocks, how does it relate to the trees and the relationships between all this stuff. So kind of tried to pull all this together, you know, and make it into one body of work. So this one here is called Clarity in Motion. This probably was 12 years ago, kind of walking down a riverbank and not a whole lot going on, and then I stopped. And this was kind of right in the opening there, and I was like, you know, that's really interesting. And I started to kind of think about it, you know, what does that mean? I'm seeing something through the trees, you know, that would otherwise be obscured if you're not looking for it. So you can relate that, you know, to a lot of things in life. Anyways, this is called the River Within. This isn't far from here. This is probably 20 miles down the Connecticut River. I drove by this scene probably for a decade, and it looked cool, but not cool enough to get out the equipment, and it just wasn't right. So, like I said about having very narrow filters, I usually shoot under very, very specific conditions because it kind of achieves the effect that I'm looking for, kind of that soft light. Like someone mentioned John Sexton before, that quiet light. So typically, you know, late into the evening, overcast, just rained, kind of things like that. This one, with these 4 that I was trying to present today, I was trying to push myself to get more layers in terms of the images. So foreground, background, kind of like Pete said earlier, helping you kind of walk in to an image where you have different layers and things going on, where it kind of brings you around. So this one's called Leaning into the Natural Direction. Naturally, there's some leaning trees, but you know, I was again walking along a river, actually probably 100 yards from that first picture. This is no longer here due to someone else earlier too mentioned hurricanes and tornadoes and stuff up here in the Northeast. So this scene is pretty much covered in all fallen and dead trees now, so you couldn't even retake this if you wanted to. So that one's really really special to me. And then this one's called The Path of Possibilities. So I won't go through the whole story, but it kind of really paralleled my life at the time, and I kind of just saw something when I came upon this. I actually waited a few days to take this, And again, going with layers, you know, I said, I need to find a way to somehow work that, you know, this section of the fall is what initially attracted me to that, the angles there and the reflection, but I said there's gotta be a way that I can work that root into the image, because I thought it was just so much of a part of that scene, so it took a while for me to kind of figure that out, but I love this one because it kind of leads you in, and there's, you know, a lot of different things going on, a lot of different layers in that image. So anyways, if you guys have any questions or, sure.
You said that you have really narrow filter, and you primarily shot moving water.
Mhm.
Do you ever challenge yourself to maybe take your skill in shooting moving water to shoot other things that move? Or vice versa, you're incredibly sharp, like you've got a real skill at getting sharpness and details and whatnot. Have you ever thought about taking that skill and putting it somewhere else?
It's a good question.
The only reason I say that is because I know a couple of people who, like one person, he shoots primarily like motorbikes, and like for years shot them like moving, and then just kind of out of necessity started to shoot something else, but because he knew how to shoot that motion, he could shoot other things that moved.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thought, because I know like in creating these, it's not like math calculations or anything that go into it, it's a lot of like feel of what you think, but a lot of times I have to wait until this stuff's moving at a certain speed, whether it's my equipment that's the limitation or how I know I want it to look. But yeah, I mean, I imagine it's probably similar with how fast is this moving and what do I need to do to.
Yeah, if you already have
Capture
that
it.
sense, it's a hard thing to learn. Like I can't do it.
It's an interesting thought, though. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks.
you're welcome.
I'm really interested in what you said about this one. Like, suddenly one day it was cool enough. Like, it was you, obviously. I mean, it's always been cool in some way. But
Yeah.
suddenly you just couldn't avoid it. You couldn't not go out and do something with it. And it just was a question of gestating up there somewhere for a number of years, it sounds like, right? You
Oh, yeah.
Here, yeah.
A lot of years, and I think part of it is like your mind's eye, you know, and I see certain. This looks nothing like this, as you guys all know. I mean, that when I see things, I don't see it in reality. I see what do I want this to look like if I was to capture it, or what would nature give me? Like what's the limitations of what it'll give me on a given day? And I think to me that's really important, because there's so much planning that goes into this stuff that especially with large format, and that in fact a friend of mine that's a photographer shoots a lot of, you know, wildlife and animals and stuff like that, and he was like, you know, how do you go somewhere like this and shoot 2 negatives, and it's a duplicate, so it's one picture. He's like, how do you walk here, know where to put your stuff, and click the shutter twice? And I was like, well, because I planned this picture for 10 years. Like, I didn't walk up and plan it and say, oh, I think this will look good, and I had a picture burned in my mind for a decade that this is what I wanted it to look like, and...
Well, it's 10 years of photography educating you.
That too, yeah.
About, so that you cannot see this literally, but now you can, because you know when you play a shutter speed back to yourself in your mind, you know how it's going to look. And it took you that long, because there's a lot going on here. I mean, it's serene, but it's not simple, but it's very together. And
Thank you.
it's beautiful.
Thank you.
But it took you 10 years to get to that point where you knew that you had what it took to interpret that in the way that it looks.
Yeah, I think everything had to come together and align, and a big part of that was the weather. These falls are either white because there's too much water, or they're dry, or it's too sunny, too rainy, too too many weeds, too many people, so it's just so many variables.
You know, obviously you spend a lot of time on camera position, selection of position and lighting. That's the two most important things in landscape photography is the lighting and camera position. Obviously there's a lot of thought put into that. It shows.
Thank you.
So tangential to what Steve said, how did you get involved in large format at like the age of 22? What got you, takes most of us longer to...
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of it was Steve, my uncle Tim, because they do this work, and I had a 35 millimeter camera that was my parents' back in the 80s, and this is neat. You can explore and stuff like that, and I think that really didn't translate directly to this for many years until I found black and white, and I think we were talking before. Like, I get easily confused by color. This is very personal, but I went to Afghanistan right after 9/11, and it's completely one color and tone, and I was there for a long time, and I came back and I was completely overwhelmed with color. Like, I still have trouble going into Walmart because it's just so confusing. Like, there's so many different things going on, so I think that's what really drew me to this too, because I like leading lines, I like angles, and I work with texture, contrast, black and white, and every time I've ever tried to add color on top of that, my mind explodes because I can't reconcile all of that at once. So I think this kind of brings back something really simplistic, and I feel that I personally can express an idea better just in black and white, and I think film, renders light very, very differently, very nice, and I kind of goes back to it. I've been developing film the same way for probably 10 years, and I don't like change, and so I can kind of just be on autopilot when I'm producing the work, and then I can, all the creative aspect can come in afterwards, and I have a ton of control with black and white, to really push the envelope there.
They're beautifully composed and printed, as others have alluded to, but I can't help but be more curious about something that you mentioned originally about what you had written about them and sort of the backstory, and I wonder if you thought about, you said it was a project, but I wonder if you thought about combining the commentary that has to do with your own life with the pictures in some sort of book. I mean, not just a sheet of paper that accompanies the purchase, but a whole series. That
Yeah, I would love to. I don't know if I have, I'd like to have more work to do that, but that's definitely...
Well, you're only 37, right?
Yeah, I have time. So it's a goal of mine for sure.
Yeah.
And I think that format would be easier to consume, when someone's, you're sitting and you have the time to really digest that.
Yeah, I feel like I've missed something by not reading more.
Oh, that's quite all right. All of this is also on, I have a website that has this all together as well, so.
There will come a time when your backpack will feel a little heavier. As the years go by.
You got time.
Not for a while.
Did you do much photography in Afghanistan?
I did. I took about 3,000 pictures. I had a digital camera, and that was kind of it wasn't a combat correspondent or anything, but I was kind of like the guy with the camera because we traveled a lot, and I just happened to have a camera. So I have boxes and boxes of 4x6 prints at home that I saved in very, very safe storage. So, I mean, there's a few artistic images in there. A lot of it's more documentary style.
Wonderful work, Matt.
Thank you.